The lights inside the restaurant were incredibly bright and beautiful. Large crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, casting a warm, golden glow over the expensive white tablecloths. Well dressed people sat at nearby tables, talking in quiet, polite voices and laughing softly as they enjoyed their fancy dinners. I sat at a corner table, wearing my best dark suit. My heart was beating very fast, not because of the expensive food, but because of the woman sitting across from me. Her name was Nora. She was beautiful, smart, and came from a very wealthy, respected family. We had been dating for 6 months, and tonight I was planning to ask her to marry me. I had a small velvet box hidden securely inside my jacket pocket. Everything was going perfectly until the heavy glass front door of the restaurant opened. An old woman stepped inside. She wore a faded, oversized gray cardigan that had a small tear near the pocket. Her shoes were old, worn-out sneakers that looked completely out of place in such a luxury establishment. In her right hand, she held a long, thin white cane with a red tip. She moved the cane slowly back and forth across the shiny marble floor, her movements hesitant and clumsy. My breath caught in my throat. My face instantly turned bright red with intense heat. "Oh, look," Nora said softly, her eyes moving toward the door with a look of slight pity. "An old blind woman has come in. She looks completely lost. I wonder if someone should help her." I didn't say a word. I pulled my menu up higher, completely hiding my face behind the thick cardboard. I wanted to disappear into the floorboards. I wanted to escape to another planet, because that old, poorly dressed blind woman was my mother. Her name was Celia. My mother, Celia, was 56 years old, but the heavy burdens of her life made her look much older. Her hair was mostly gray, tied back in a messy bun, and her face was lined with deep wrinkles. She had been completely blind for as long as I could remember. Growing up, I was always deeply ashamed of her. When I was a schoolboy, she would try to walk me to the bus stop, tapping her white cane loudly against the pavement. The other children would laugh, point fingers, and make cruel jokes. "Look at Leo's mom," they would shout. "She is walking into the stop sign again." I hated those moments. I hated the feeling of being different, the feeling of being poor, and most of all, I hated her blindness. As I grew up, my shame turned into a cold, bitter resentment. I worked incredibly hard at my university studies, got a high-paying job at a corporate marketing firm, and moved into a modern apartment downtown. I wanted to leave her world behind. I wanted a life of luxury, style, and perfection, a life that matched Nora's world. And now, my mother was ruining the most important night of my life. She continued to walk into the dining room, her cane tapping loudly against a polished floor. Tap, tap, tap. The sound felt like a hammer hitting my brain. People at neighboring tables stopped talking and turned their heads to watch her. "Excuse me, ma'am," a tall, serious waiter in a tuxedo said, stepping directly into her path. "Are you looking for someone? This is a private dining room." "Yes, please," my mother said. Her voice was soft, trembling, and clear. "My son, Leo, is celebrating here tonight. I brought him a small package that he forgot on his kitchen counter this morning. I took the public bus across town to bring it to him." Nora lowered her wine glass, her eyebrows rising in surprise. She looked at the old woman, then she looked directly at me. "Leo, did she say your name? Is that your mother?" I couldn't hide behind the menu any longer. The waiter was looking around the room, trying to find the son. Nora was staring at me with an intense, questioning expression. I stood up from my comfortable leather chair, my jaw tight with a mixture of intense anger and profound humiliation. I walked quickly across the dining room, my shiny leather shoes clicking loudly. I grabbed my mother's thin arm roughly, pulling her away from the center of the room and into the quiet, dark hallway near the restrooms. Leo, is that you, my boy? She asked, a warm, joyful smile spreading across her wrinkled face. She reached out her old, rough hand to touch my cheek. I can smell your expensive cologne. I am so glad I found you. You left your lucky silver fountain pen at the apartment. I know you wanted it for your big proposal tonight, so I... Stop it, Mother! Just stop it! I hissed in a furious, harsh whisper, violently knocking her hand away from my face. The warm smile instantly disappeared from her lips. Her pale, clouded eyes blinked rapidly in the dark hallway, looking completely lost and hurt. You embarrass me, I said, the bitter words pouring out of my mouth like poison. Look at you. Look at your clothes. You come into a luxury restaurant looking like a beggar, tapping that stupid stick, making everyone stare at us. I am trying to ask a wealthy, elegant woman to marry me tonight, and you walk in and ruin everything. Why can't you just stay at home? Why do you always have to ruin my life with your blindness? My mother stood perfectly still. It looked as if my words had physically struck her in the chest. Her bottom lip trembled slightly, and she clutched her old white cane tightly with both hands. A single, heavy tear leaked from her blind left eye and rolled down a deep wrinkle on her cheek. I am so sorry, Leo, she whispered, her voice completely broken. I didn't mean to embarrass you. I just wanted you to have your lucky pen. She carefully placed a small wrapped velvet pouch onto a small decorative table in the hallway. Then, without another word, she turned around. She used her cane to guide her body along the wall, walking slowly and unsteadily out of the restaurant and into the dark, cold, rainy night. I stood in the hallway for a long minute, my chest heaving as I tried to calm my breathing. I felt a small, uncomfortable sting of guilt in my stomach, but my anger was still far too strong. I picked up the velvet pouch from the table, slid it into my pocket, and walked back to our dining table. Nora looked at me with a strange, cool expression as I sat down. Is everything okay, Leo? That old woman looked very upset. Yes, everything is fine, I said, forcing a bright, casual smile onto my face. She is just an old neighbor from my childhood apartment. She has some mental confusion and sometimes mistakes me for her son. Let's ignore it and enjoy our beautiful dinner. Nora nodded slowly, but the warm, romantic atmosphere of the night was completely dead. I couldn't bring myself to pull out the engagement ring. We finished our dinner in a tense, awkward silence, and I drove her home early. When I returned to my own quiet apartment at midnight, I threw my jacket onto the sofa. The small velvet pouch my mother had brought fell out onto the cushions. I picked it up, pulled the drawstrings open, and emptied the contents into my hand. Inside was my silver fountain pen, just as she had said. But there was something else inside the pouch. It was an old, faded cardboard box, tied neatly with a piece of blue string. I sat down on the sofa, feeling a sudden wave of curiosity. I untied the blue string and opened the lid of the box. Inside lay a collection of old papers, my childhood report cards, my university diploma, and a small, dusty medical file from a hospital dated 23 years ago. The exact year I was 5 years old. I pulled out the medical file and opened the yellowed pages. At the top of the first sheet, written in bold medical script, were the words surgical report, corneal transplantation, and emergency ocular repair. I began to read the document, and within 2 minutes, my entire world completely shattered. The hospital report described a terrible apartment fire that had occurred 23 years ago. I had completely forgotten about the fire because I was so young, and my mother had always told me that my father had died in an illness before we moved to the city. According to the report, a faulty heater had exploded in our small living room while I was sleeping on the carpet. The room had instantly filled with thick smoke and raging flames. My mother had dived through the fire to wrap her body around me, protecting my skin from the burning heat. But a piece of sharp, exploding glass from the heater had sliced directly into my young eyes, destroying my corneas. The doctor stated that I was going to be permanently, completely blind for the rest of my life, unless I received an immediate corneal transplant from a living donor. I turned the page, my hands shaking so violently that the old paper rattled in the quiet apartment. Pinned to the back of the file was a signed legal consent form. I, Celia, being of sound mind, hereby give total permission to the surgeons to remove my healthy corneas and transplant them immediately into the eyes of my 5-year-old son, Leo. I understand completely that this procedure will leave me in a state of permanent, irreversible blindness for the remainder of my life. I choose this willingly so that my boy may see the world, go to school, and have a beautiful, bright future. I stared at the black ink of her signature at the bottom of the page. I wasn't born with a blind mother. She wasn't blind because of a disease or an accident or old age. She was completely blind because she had given her own eyes to me. The very eyes I used to study, the eyes I used to get my high-paying corporate job, and the eyes I had used tonight to look at her with such disgust and hatred. Those eyes belonged to her. A loud, choked sob tore out of my throat. The room felt like it was spinning. I fell to my knees on the floor, clutching the medical papers against my chest as hot, bitter tears of profound regret and shame poured down my face. What have I done? I cried out into the empty, dark apartment. What have I said to her? I lay on the cold hardwood floor of my apartment for a long time, clenching the yellowed medical papers against my chest. The expensive dark suit I wore was wrinkled and covered in dust, but I didn't care. The image of my mother's face in the dark restaurant hallway, blinking rapidly, a single tear rolling down her cheek after I had hissed that she embarrassed me, kept flashing in my mind like a terrifying nightmare. Every success I had in my life suddenly felt hollow and dynamic. My high-paying marketing job, my modern apartment, my elegant girlfriend Nora, none of it was truly mine. It was all built upon her terrible sacrifice. I had been living in the light for 23 years, while she lived in total, permanent darkness, just so I could have a bright future. And how had I repaid her? With 23 years of shame, silence, and, tonight, total hatred. I remembered a small moment from my childhood. I was maybe 7 years old, 2 years after the transplant. We were living in a tiny one-room apartment that always smelled slightly of old soup. My mother was sitting on a broken armchair, holding a small picture book with her fingers, trying to read the pages to me by feeling the raised ink of the alphabet. "Can you see the colorful picture of the big blue whale, Leo?" she had asked, her pale, clouded eyes staring into the distance with a strange, longing expression. "Yes, Mom, I can see it. It is huge and beautiful," I had shouted happily, pointing to the colorful illustration. I remembered that she had smiled a smile of pure, complete joy at my answer. I hadn't understood then, But I understood now. She wasn't smiling because of the story. She was smiling because she had succeeded. I could see the colorful world that she would never look upon again. A fresh wave of hot, bitter regret washed over me, choking my throat. I stood up unsteadily, grabbing my car keys from the counter. I didn't care that it was 1 o'clock in the morning. I had to go to her. I had to beg for her forgiveness before my soul completely dissolved into this toxic shame. The city streets were dark and empty, slick with rain as I drove away from the modern downtown and toward the older, poorer suburban neighborhood where I had grown up. The street lamps became older and dimmer, and the buildings were no longer tall glass towers, but faded brick apartment blocks. I parked my car in front of the rundown building where my mother lived. The exterior was covered in peeling paint, and a broken bicycle was chained to the rusty fence. I ran up the 3 flights of stairs, my heart pounding with increasing panic. What if she wouldn't open the door? What if she was packed and gone? I reached apartment 3B and knocked loudly on the thin wooden door. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was deafening in the quiet hallway. There was no answer. "Mother, it is Leo. Please open the door," I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. I pressed my ear against the wood, listening for any sound of her white cane tapping against the floor. Nothing. Panic truly set in. Where would a blind woman go at 1 o'clock in the morning, especially in the cold rain? I remembered how hesitant and clumsy her movements were in the restaurant dining room. If she had been truly hurt by my cruel words, she might have just wandered out into the dangerous city night, completely lost. I ran back down the stairs and into the pouring rain. I ran down the dark streets of our old neighborhood, shouting her name. "Celia, Celia, Mother, where are you?" The rain soaked through my suit, making me shiver, but the internal freezing of my regret was much worse. I searched for an hour, looking behind dark alleyways and empty bus stops. Finally, I remembered the small, rundown public park near the apartment where she used to take me to play when I was small. I ran to the park. The swings were swaying silently in the wet wind. Sitting alone on an old wooden bench, hunched over against the cold rain, was the faded, oversized gray cardigan. Celia was sitting perfectly still, clutched tightly against her old white cane, completely soaked and shivering violently. "Mother!" I cried out, my voice breaking with profound relief. I sprinted across the wet grass, dynamic and desperate. I fell to my knees in the muddy grass directly in front of the bench. I grabbed her thin, old hands. They were freezing, as cold as ice, and shaking uncontrollably. "Leo, is that you?" she asked, her voice a fragile, trembling whisper. She couldn't feel my expensive cologne through the cold rain. Yes, Mother, it is me. It is Leo," I sobbed, lowering my forehead onto her wet hands. My hot tears were dynamic and endless, mixing with the cold rain on her skin. I am so sorry, Leo," she whispered, her pale, clouded eyes staring into the dark park. "I tried to get home. I took the wrong bus. I got dynamic and completely lost. I am a stupid old woman. I just wanted to wait here until morning so I wouldn't embarrass you by asking a policeman for help." Her words felt like someone was ripping my chest open with a jagged knife. Even now, shivering in the cold, dynamic rain, she was worried about embarrassing me. "No, Mother, you are not dynamic and stupid. I am the one who is stupid," I shouted, holding her freezing hands against my wet cheeks. I found the old cardboard box inside the velvet pouch. I read the surgical report from 23 years ago. Her entire body froze on the wet bench. Her pale lips parted slightly, and the shivering stopped for a moment as her clouded eyes widened in shock. You read it? Yes, I choked out, a fresh dynamic wave of grief pouring from my eyes. I know everything now. I know why you are blind. You gave your healthy corneas to a 5-year-old boy. You gave your sight to me so I could have a bright, dynamic future. The eyes I have, the eyes I used to study to get my high-paying corporate job, and the eyes I used to look at you with dynamic disgust and hatred tonight, those eyes belong to you. Oh godmother, I am so dynamic and incredibly sorry. I lay my head back onto her icy knees, my shoulders shaking violently with my unending sobs. I felt a cold tear of my own roll down her freezing gray cardigan. For 23 years, I had held onto this toxic resentment, this belief that her blindness was a burden I was forced to carry. The reality was that my very ability to see the world was her greatest gift to me. I lay completely broken before her, exposed in the muddy grass. I waited for her to push me away. I waited for her to tell me that my apology was too late and that my cruel words in the restaurant could never be forgiven. Instead, I felt a gentle, rough hand move slowly through the air. I felt the warmth of her fingertips touch the back of my wet neck. She leaned forward until her cold cheek was resting against my wet hair. "My beautiful boy," she whispered through her own silent tears, her voice full of that same complete joy I had heard when I was 7 years old. "I didn't give you my eyes so you would love me. I gave you my eyes so that you could see the world. It is the only thing I ever wanted for you, my Leo." She didn't care about my success, my high income, or my fancy corporate job. She only cared that I was safe and happy. Her love was completely selfless and unconditional, a concept I had been completely blind to my entire adult life. I helped my shivering mother stand up unsteadily from the wet bench. I wrapped my expensive dark suit jacket, the one I was so ashamed she might ruin, around her frail shoulders, completely ignoring the mud and grass stains. I held her tight against my chest, guiding her slowly out of the dark park. "You are never going back to that small rundown apartment, Mother," I told her, my voice steady and resolute. "You are coming to live with me. I have a large apartment with lots of space. I am going to buy you the softest clothes, cook you healthy, warm dinners every single night, and spend every single day trying to earn the incredible gift you gave to me." "That sounds wonderful, Leo," she whispered softly as I helped her into the warm front seat of my car. A beautiful sense of peace finally began to settle into my heart as I drove her away from our past. The rain continued to pour down against the windshield, but for the first time in 23 years, I wasn't just driving through the dark. I was looking forward to the bright morning light that would be completely ours. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to Storyline English. See you next time.